Bueno.
Good morning. My name is Alejandro Silva. I've worked for a long time in this type of R&D at GeneXus. The purpose of my talk is to tell you about what we are doing with generators, particularly with Angular. It started as a prototype. You know, I like cars. When there are car fairs in Geneva or wherever, and there's a prototype like a car, but it's unfeasible for any street, well, I wanted to try out many ideas, and in the process, we thought that there were many good things there apart from the Angular itself, and that's one of the things I'd like to share with you today, and that is what we want to turn that into, you know, something for production, something to come out in the street, and what we are doing, what you can expect from all this, what is there, what is in there for you, for those using GeneXus and those who are not. That's the purpose of this presentation. So let's see what we can do here. And the previous speaker has already referred to many of these things in Angular, and that's fine. So I'm not going to explain them to you, and we'll move faster. What is it that we are talking about? What do we say when we talk about Angular? What are we going to generate? When you have to develop a web application, you have to develop what you can see there on the transparency. That's a web app. There is a front end, what you can see in the browser, where there is a user interface, there is a state, there is a connector that connects to the database. And then in the server, you have backend, you have a group of services, there's a business logic, and there is a database. Now, to develop a web app, you have to do all this. Now, you've got it with GeneXus at present. The web generator does all this. This is what we call a full stack. It's a front-end, back-end developers. Now, what we're going to be talking about today, it's that Angular is a front-end generator, what runs on the browser. And so what is it that we generate with GeneXus? That's a basic scheme of what you can do with GeneXus. If you look there, there's sort of imbalance to the right, and that's what I wanted to explain to you. We've always been very agnostic as to adopting technologies that are, you know, investing in technologies very carefully. So in the back end, we have Java and .NET platforms. Most of the market are them running on servers. We're talking about .NET Core because we think that that's good, and that in some way is the future of .NET. And behind all that, we've developed solutions, as it's happened with many databases that you've got there. They're not all there. You know, you can do it, you can display it on the cloud, and you have all those options. So in the back end, we developed on top of a group of frameworks and platforms that are consolidated. Now, what happens with the front end? Let me open brackets here because down below I added smart devices, and that's not a web front end, but technically speaking, they work in the same way. Remember what we said about the front end? You have the user experience. It keeps data, it is connected to a server, and a smart device platform is practically the same. I'm mentioning this because this is going to be far more pertinent when I tell you what we are doing and how we are generating this, using this generator. We've covered most of the market for Android and for Apple. Now, in the front end, what we're generating there in GeneXus 16 is well, what are the platforms and frameworks? Well, we developed our own framework. Why? Why did we get there? Why aren't we standing on a platform or on something else, as it happens with the rest of the things that we generate? Well, because there was none. Because when we started with the web generator, when the web was born, and at that time there was nothing on what to stand. So you would set up a page on the web and send it to the browser, and then it would go back with data and so on. So you had pages coming and going. Now, as time went by, things changed. And there are many technologies now that we've been adopting, but there was never a framework. There was never something that we could say, all right, let's stand on top of this, and we're going to have a good solution. And so we developed it. So we had Ajax. So it's like having a little bit of the page without having to look for that. There were some libraries. Some of them went on living, others died out. And then the same thing we did with progressive web applications. Change the pages that go into the server. We implemented them in the framework. Well, we used to have single-page applications. With the progressive applications are going to be in our framework. And so the framework we've got, what you generate in the web, is something that we've been developing and that we have kept and will continue developing in the future. The Angular generator doesn't replace any of this. It's simply adding things. Now, what else happened since we went from website to web app? Well, something else happened. And in fact, there are frameworks or solutions that are sound and backed up by large companies that deserve investment and start using those technologies, not simply because they are good, but because we start using them and our clients are using them, and we think that they're good solutions, in fact, and there are many things that we've done, and it's a good platform to continue working on. We're going to be talking about that a little bit, and why choose Angular and what's Angular got that others don't. So by 2010, something happened. Angular 2 changed, and it's incompatible with AngularJS, but it's not a mature solution. Then we had Riad along the way. It's not a framework. It's a library, as Nico said, and I'm going to tell you more about it. So if you want to see the dominating solutions or the more promising solutions to develop front-end solutions, it's Angular, Riad, in Vue. I'm not going to dwell on this. Nico will explain this in depth in his talk. Let me give you a brief overview. Riad is the one that is backed up by Facebook. Apparently it was going to be paid, but now it's open source. It's a library that only resolves the user interface part. It doesn't solve the question of status. If I want to work with Riad as a front-end developer, I have to build a stack of libraries to make my development. I must make decisions and make engagements to see what I'm going to do to ODs or base applications or whatever. So I have to make decisions, and that's good because it gives me flexibility. But there are certain problems that, in a way, I'm getting married to them, and well, you know, as it happens with everything, there are pros and cons. If it's trip, that's the one that's used the most. And then we have Angular. Now, Angular is quite different. Angular is a framework, so if I want to develop a project using Angular front end, that's it. I don't have to make any decisions. TypeScript is backed up by Google. It's the oldest, if you want. Now, there you've got some kind of barrier to enter. When you come from Java, there is a paradigm there, and then Riyadh, the paradigm is more functional as JavaScript. So something that Angular has is a good adoption of corporate, and that's important because of what I was saying. Since it's more focused on objects, it's better adapted to working deep in the corporate environment. But it's been adopted the most because it's got a very clear scheme of updates. And since it's a full framework solution, it doesn't require any engagement. It's more generic, and it's easier to integrate people from various teams. And when you release an Angular, it's the full Angular. If I've got a solution in Riyadh, then I have to take it to React and then to Redux or Modix or whatever, and I must be able to see whether they match. So all those libraries tested, but the final responsibility is sort of thinned out, and there is no company behind it. Whereas Angular, before releasing it, it releases it internally in a very interesting process, and then it comes out. And the third one is Vue. Now, Vue is a singularity, I think, because first of all, there is no big company behind it. It's developed by a developer. It's an Angular developer, worked on the JS. Even you, who work with Angular in a project, and now it's very light. It's similar to React, but it's programmed in JavaScript. It only solves the part of UI, so you have to set up a stack. Now, it's easier to use. The learning curve is more benign. It's the lightest. And the most interesting thing about Vue is that it's got a foot in each world. It works fine in China, in the corporate world. The largest Chinese companies use it. But Vue also uses it, private companies also. Those are state-owned. But so it does well there. But the interesting thing is that it's also doing well in the front-end development, in front-end equipment developing JavaScript. So that rivalry between Angular and React, Vue has a foot on both worlds, and we'll have to see how it moves on, but it's quite interesting to see. Now, this graph is not a very significant metric, but it's the startups. It's like the lights of projects. Now, the interesting thing here is that Vue starts growing. It's the orange line in the middle, and there is a growth there. Now, as regards adoption, the first one is React, and then Angular growing strongly, and then Vue. Now, Vue is well, the curve is a bit flat, but it's a growth that is being accelerated.
¿Sí? A ver, al final nosotros en estos elegimos Angular. ¿Sí? Ahora...
So at the end of the day, we've chosen Angular. Well, it's the most generic solution, is the one that is adapted the most to our way of working. If you want to do something, it's easy to check. So we are coming from C Java, and so it's easier to take it up. You don't have to make large engagements to make a development. I've got Angular, and that's it. Although you can add other things, in general, you don't do it. And that's why we've decided to choose Angular. Now, so far, I've told you about how we got to the Angular generator and what's happening. We're simply not thinking of any other, but well, now we may be thinking about others, but now we are focused on this. I've told you about how we made this decision. Let's see its functions now. And now we're coming to the core of it, and I like it, at least I do. I said we are working on the front end. And so what we do is that we present information, we validate it, and we are connected with a server using data. And this is as technical as I can be. When we generate a panel in GeneXus, in Angular, we generate it in 3 layers. We have a presentation layer. I'm talking about the front end, right? This is going to run in JavaScript. So we've got a presentation layer where you have the UI. I've got a column in which Angular translated. If it's called HTML, it's a template that is going to render to HTML. And that's what the UI represents in a program generated by Angular. There are controls, the controls to edit, to upload an image, or control a map. Then we have another part, which is the component, and it's a TypeScript, and that's why it's extension TS, where is the logic behind that view, behind that HTML. There is a logic and binds it. It's binded. There is a binding, and there's a relatively interesting mechanisms to solve that. And that's where the GeneXus program, where you generate events, you put them there. In that part, and what you see there is operators that you would do on streams, or you go to the local storage and you use a library to store something in the browser. There's a whole API that GeneXus uses, and that's what is generated there. All right. And then there's a connector in service. It's called service. It's not a web service. It's an Angular service that basically provides information to the component. That service goes to the component, or it doesn't, depending on how it's connected. But it does now, but we can cut it off and store something there to implement a web application and so on. Now, why am I telling you all this? Well, because I'd like to tell you how we're going about these components, how we are making these generators, and how different it is from the ones we have. We are using different technologies. They are all quite popular. In the first place, for the UI components, we aren't building map control or edit control. We're not making an Angular. We're not going to do it in Angular. We are doing it in the web components technology, as Mr. Cardellino explained in the previous session. It's a technology that allows us to develop components that can be reused in different apps independent of the language that you're using, whether it's Angular, React, or whatever. Now, that library is being developed as part of the GeneXus Angular, but we'll use it or not in our own framework. But if we do Angular, we are using that generator, and if we don't, anyway, we can use it because it's independent. That GeneXus API, we call it the standard. That's how to solve substreaming, how to use it with storage. I mean, all that kind of functions are being written in JavaScript. We're not doing it in Angular, and that's going to be another separate library that's going to be shared by all the generators that we have got. And lastly, we have the generator itself, which gathers all those parts. And in this case, we are using technologies. I won't say that they are daily generated because we don't, but these are easier. Information is obtained more easily. Now, why do we do it in that way? Well, all along these years, for 25 years, we've been producing generators, and we developed our own technology. We use Prolog, for instance, or JSON or whatever, and it works very well, and we do well with it. But if now I'd say, well, if you had to make a generator, you wouldn't do it in that way. you put in Google and it would tell you how to do it. A generator would tell you string templates, syntactic trees, and so on. We're not using that for our generators on the street right now. Something else we want to do with the generator was to use the technologies that are used more frequently when you say, I'm going to make a generator today. Why am I saying all this? I don't want to explain that diagram. Of course not, but what we can see here is what is it that we want with this generator. On the one hand, we want you that as GeneXus users, you can generate in Angular and have one further platform to generate. On the other hand, and it's happened, there are companies that apart from generating make their own frameworks, their own libraries, their own components, and so that they can have more integration points with this type of generator. And so let's suppose that tomorrow you have a generator, you want to change something from in the Angular generator to use a component that you've developed for a specific purpose. You would go to the control library and you'll modify it there, and Angular would accept it. So that's another idea. That's something else that we wanted to include as a byproduct in this generator. Apart from having an Angular generator, we can have more integration points, easier for companies using GeneXus and doing other things manually and want to be integrated. This is one way. The same thing happens with the API. And from that standpoint, you could take the Angular generator, use the controls, and don't touch anything, use the API library, not touch anything, and convert it into a React generator. And I mean, this is not trivial. It's not that we do it, we take it in, we do it in 2 weeks, but it's something that you could do. It's not what we want to do, but our main purpose is not that. Our main purpose is to give you an Angular generator, and in the future perhaps do make other generators. But if you want to use it and integrate your solutions, it could be good. We've worked with a company along this process, which is Edit Cheese. They are part of it's called Big Cheese, and they did the part of GAM and other controls. They've also used an alpha of this Angular generator internally so that they could put on top of it an Angular development communicating with the services of a GeneXus app. One of the things I'd like to show you, and I've told you why Angular and why and how we are doing all this and how this generator is going to work. Let me show you a demo. Very short demo. This is an app that Big Cheese made.
No sé si se ve. ¿Se ve? No. Ahí está. Bueno, esta es una...
There we go. This is... It's a bit thin. This is a Conaprole app using the Angular generator. It's internal. It's an internal app. I don't have a screen here. Let me see. Well, this is an internal app. It was a game, betting game. They wanted to promote the use of this app that has other characteristics in the company, and what the application does basically is to allow. This is running in my server I have. It's communicating with an Angular, and it's communicating with a .NET that I've got in my computer. And it's an app where I can update the data if it's responsive. It's generated on Smart Devices app. And so we've got the game part where I would add something or change it, and it follows the logics of turning on and off things. So it's got the ranking, filters, all the events behind it. So specifically, I don't have much more time, but I wanted to wrap up really. Well, what I wanted to show you is about the value, and instead of going on with that. What's the purpose of this generator? Well, it's to give you one more platform. What can you find in here? Well, for a GeneXus developer, you'll be able to take up an app and generate it in Angular, apart from the general traditional GeneXus platform, which probably in the future, not in very distant future, they're going to ask you for this type of platforms in the front end. The first stage, we're going to take the smart devices apps and generate them with Angular. That's the first stage, and that's why I wanted to show you. I showed you the things at the beginning. Perhaps in the first beta, you'll be able to generate that minimum application with Angular. Now, those having GeneXus, but who have manual generators, perhaps in Angular and web, what do we want to give you? Well, would like you to integrate GeneXus in that stack that you've got. If you want to modify the generator, if you want to put in your components and change the controls, you can do it. You can be integrated in other ways. You can adapt your solutions better to what we have. And that's what I wanted to show you today. And to conclude, because we have run out of time, we're going to release beta of this generator before year's end. And that's our proposal. That beta will obviously go through a traditional beta process, and we'll release it once it's sound enough. We think that the first beta can be used. I mean, that app that I've shown you, it's already working. There are many things about completeness that we have to complete, but we are there, we are along that way, and that's the presentation I wanted to make today. Thank you.